And there is no doubt that the change has driven extensively in the UAE because of this legislation. So if we want the same level of change in other parts of the GCC, maybe we also need some legislation or even some targets.
Yes. Is the issue today more about willingness, institutional culture, or leadership pipelines from your point of view?
So what you're really asking there is there a supply side problem? So are there issues with the number of available women qualified to serve on boards? And the straight answer is no. Not in any country, not in any single country in the GCC. The GCC actually has a very good track record of the whole region of educating and qualifying women. There are excellent, for instance, female accountants, qualified accountants in every single Gulf country. And there are no shortage of women in so we're talking here only about public company boards. If you look in other areas like family businesses or government, actually government is a very good example. There are some excellent women in very senior parts of government who would make excellent board directors. So I don't think that there's a supply problem or a lack of women in leadership.
From a cultural perspective, maybe related to some Arab context, are companies still asking, why should we appoint women instead of how can we, as you once described in comparison with the UK for experience?
So in the UK, we definitely went from a place of people saying, why should we, to saying, how can we? But this didn't happen overnight. So I started working with a group of other women under the leadership of Baroness Morrissey in 2010. And we got together and we called ourselves the 30% Club because our goal was 30% of women on boards. And the reason for 30% was that all of the academic work shows you that when any minority gets to 30%, it stops being a minority and it's part of the mainstream debate. So in any country, I mean, you can see that just in the makeup of countries in terms of nationalities, that the bigger the representation of any one nationality. So for instance, Indians in the UAE, once you get to a certain proportion of the population, you stop being a minority and you're part of the normal way of life. And that is why we chose 30%. And at the time, the percentage of women on the top 100 boards, and this is just the top 100 boards, was 12%. So it was behind where the UAE is now. Yeah. And it had been at 12% for 10 years. So zero, forget glacial progress. There had been zero progress in the UK between 2000 and 2010, none. Mm-hmm. So we went out on a campaign to try and persuade chairmen to appoint more women. And we did have to take them on that journey from why should I to how can I?
Yeah, this is very impressive, and it's also inspiring to all leadership levels, not only in the Arab region, but in the whole world, to know how to ask the right questions to lead us to the right answers. One of the strongest themes emerging from global leadership discussions is that board diversity problems often begin with a much earlier in the leadership pipeline. What are the main barriers preventing more women from reaching board level positions from your perspective?
I think that we don't have a supply problem. That's not a barrier. What we need is committed chairmen. So we need every public company chairman. So there are, I'm just checking my report numbers in front of me, we're 759 companies across the whole GCC region. So I call on 759 chairmen, almost all of whom are men, to ask themselves the question, could I appoint a woman to my board? Either could I appoint one additional number, one more person, or next time I have a vacancy, maybe I should consider only a women-only shortlist. When chairmen are making appointments to their boards, they are thinking about talents. So if you lose someone who's got a specialist, say in cybersecurity or in risk management, or a highly financially qualified person, then you need to replace them with someone who brings that same talent to your board. Maybe next time, go and look only for a woman. So either add a woman on top of all the other people you've got, or next time you have a vacancy, go and ask for a woman. One of the things that really struck me when I was doing this work this time was how many more companies we were talking about. Last year, only a year ago, we were talking about 729 companies across the GCC, and this year we're talking about 759 companies. So we are talking about an extra 30 companies, which is a 5% growth, which is it's pretty impressive actually. But most of them have listed in Saudi Arabia. If you look at the number of companies, where has the growth been? The growth has been in Saudi Arabia, which has gone from 232 public companies to 266. So it's 34 extra companies. And by the way, Saudi Arabia has a second stock exchange, NOMU, which is their small for sort of small SME type companies or less sophisticated companies. So I'm only looking at their main exchange, and on their main exchange, they added 32 companies. And I would say that an IPO is the perfect time to add a woman. So maybe everybody who's planning an IPO in Saudi Arabia should be asking the question, have I got a woman on the board?
Yes. It's really important also to look for another dimension, which is what role can universities and leadership development institutions play in strengthening this pipeline?
Well, first of all, we can, and this is what I've tried to do, is you can shine the light of publicity on it. I think if I wasn't measuring this, if Harriet Watt hadn't agreed to support me in measuring this, and we also had this year, 3 sponsors who were very kindly supported my research work. If that wasn't possible, nobody else is measuring this. So universities need to measure the things that matter. I think all universities have a responsibility to research and publish the things that matter and that are going to make an impact. And I do believe that by publishing this data, it will come to the attention of the regulators in all parts of the GCC, and I think they will look at the numbers and think, actually, I don't want to be right down this table, at the bottom of the table or nearly at the bottom of the table. I want our capital markets to be enlightened and forward thinking. And women are 50% of the population in all of these countries. So by not appointing a woman, you are excluding yourself from 50% of the talent. I like to think that universities shine a light, as I said, on the things that matter. And Mohamed, if you do not measure the things that matter, the only things that will end up mattering are the things that get measured. So if you think things are important, you should measure them.
Yes, exactly. And I think what you just mentioned, Professor, is very inspiring also, because it means that there is emerging interest or common interest between the industry sector and the university sector. So it's very important to do this kind of collaboration to explore the opportunities, also to work together and also to reach good results by the end.
And I would just add to that is why I think this year. So when I started doing this work, I didn't have anybody that was prepared to, any industry that was prepared to support me. It literally no one at the first year.
Yes.
I don't know why. I think maybe they thought it wasn't important, or I couldn't do it, or And so the second year, I had one supporter, which was Grant Thornton, who are an accountancy firm, and they obviously and a management consultancy, and a lot of these companies are their clients, and so they could see the value in it. And I also think I published it once, and I said I would do it again. That's fine. And then this year, they have continued, and we now have Board Intelligence and Alex Partners supporting it, and they are all doing different jobs with companies. So now I feel finally that I have this partnership with industry, with people who are genuinely interested in the capital markets of the Gulf.
Yeah.
Not just the women agenda, but the whole capital markets governance agenda.
Yes. I also want to ask about what role should actually male leadership play in accelerating change?
Well, this is back to the chairman again.
Yeah.
I think it's a big job being a chairman of a public company. So, as I said, I'm just checking my numbers again here. 759 companies across the Gulf. That won't be 759 chairmen, because there will be some chairmen that are chairman of multiple companies, and they are leaders. It's a serious business being the chairman of a public company. Your legal liability alone is pretty serious, frankly. And I think as part of their leadership, I would look to them to, as I said, to champion this. And we had tremendous difficulty with this in the UK way back in 2010. And in the end, what we did was we went and found two male chairmen, who were very established and highly respected and very well connected. And we asked them to telephone all the others. So I remember I was only dealing with 100 companies. It was the top 100 companies in the UK. The UK Stock Exchange has about 2,500 listed companies on the main exchange, and we're just talking about the top 100. So we found these two chairmen, and we asked them if they would help us by just phoning up all the others, the other 98, and asking them, please, would they consider the next time they made an appointment looking seriously at women candidates. And so they literally sat on the telephone for a few weeks and phoned all these other people up.
Okay. This is when we talk also about the public companies, this actually raising an important question, which is, are family businesses and private sector governance structures part of the challenge?
Well, I actually think family businesses are better at this. So in these, in the 21st century, in the Arab culture, there are lots of family businesses. I mean, the whole region is built on family businesses for hundreds of years. I mean, I like to talk about the fact that the Prophet's wife was a businessman, and a businesswoman rather. And, that businesses have existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it is a very well established practice and custom that the senior women in these families play a very important role in the governance of these companies. You won't go to family companies and find that there isn't a woman involved on some board somewhere. I'm very inspired by my own pro-chancellor, for instance, Dr. Raja Al-Ghurg, who is the entire chairwoman of the Al-Ghurg Group. I mean, that's not a public company. So, but she started the Dubai Women's Council, and she absolutely advocated for the advancement of women. But who was the visionary? It was her father. Her father was the visionary who pushed her always. She talks about this in her autobiography. to aspire to greater things, to learn the business. He sent her around all of the business to learn about the business, and then supported her into being his successor. And so it takes, I think, sometimes an enlightened man and an enlightened leader to support the cause of women.
Exactly. The GCC presents an interesting policy landscape. Some countries have introduced regulatory interventions, while others rely more on gradual institutional change. How effective are quotas and regulatory frameworks in driving change in the GCC?
So I think we can see with the example of the UAE that it's been very effective to go from 3.5% to 15% in 6 years. I mean, the legislation was introduced in 21, and as I said, in 2020 it was 3.5%. So I think we can see that legislation is very effective, but I suspect that targets would be just as effective as long as they were measured and reported on a regular basis. In Saudi Arabia, for instance, they have Vision 2030, as you know, and in Vision 2030, there is a ambition, very clearly stated, to have 30% of the workforce as women. So this is a workforce target, not a specific public company target. But, you know, it's a great thing to have targets, and they are measuring against those targets, and they are publishing it, and they're doing things to support it because they've set it as a target, and so they are reporting against progress. So I would say that setting targets, it doesn't have to be legislation. I mean, Vision 2030 isn't legislation, it's a target. But I would say setting a target, whether or not you use legislation, is very important. And then measuring against the target and reporting on progress is very important.
Yes. How can organizations move beyond compliance to genuine inclusion from your perspective?
Well, this is about, I think, not just appointing a woman on the board, but giving her a job to do. So all boards of directors have committees. They have an audit, sometimes audit and risk, sometimes audit and risk separately. They would have a nominations committee. They would have a remuneration committee. I would put a woman on the board and train her up to run a committee. And then that is what I would call inclusion, because at that point, she's not just sitting on your board as decoration or to fill a target or a quota. She's also meaningfully engaged with the leadership of a committee, and one of the things I have started to look at more seriously is what are the membership of committees, not just looking at the women on boards, but what are they doing on those boards?
Yes. As you know, Professor, sometimes we are always fond of numbers, and we like to know more about numbers and talking with numbers. But what indicators should we measure beyond these numbers?
So I would actually be measuring things like nationalities and other means of diversification. The other thing would be to be because non-financial measures, I mean, I teach actually. I don't these days. I'm afraid I have quite a big job of looking after our community of 6,000 staff and students in Dubai, so I don't have much time for teaching, but I do teach on our MBA in the finance function, and I teach the importance of measuring non-financial measures. So one of the things, I mean, most people measure, for instance, staff turnover and also length of service, and how do you measure, how do you count, what indicators other than finance are giving you the answers, because you can count everything. I could count the number of people that come to my office in a blue shirt or a blue jumper like I'm wearing today. I can do it. It won't tell me anything useful, and and it's completely pointless waste of my time. But I could count people who wear a blue jumper. I don't count it because it's of no use to me in managing my business. But I do count, for instance, how many students come onto our campus every day, even though that's not a financial number. Because I want to see, are they using the building? Are they using the spaces that I've created for them? And it drives my capital decisions as to, should I be making the campus more ready for the students or the staff? And in what proportion should I allocate capital? So measuring the things that matter is very important, and they won't all be financial at all. And I think in terms of women's representation and giving women, one of the things I'd like to do is look, for instance, at the background of these 341 women, and see, where did they come from? What qualifications do they have? Where did they work before? What executive jobs were they doing before they got a board appointment? I think some of measuring history sometimes is very informative.
Yes. This discussion is especially relevant at Al-Fanar Media, because our audience is deeply connected to higher education and youth development across the Arab world. Women across the GCC frequently outperform men in higher education participation and academic achievement. Yet this does not fully translate into leadership representation. How can higher education better prepare women for leadership and governance roles?
So the first thing I would say is that biologically, it is just a fact of life that until they invent a way to this not to happen, women are going to be having children, and that is going to be how it is. And I've always explained that I have 3 children of my own, and I did a slightly different thing while my children were young. I still worked, but I didn't have my foot to the floor pushing for a leadership job. I was working and continuing to build my CV, but I wasn't, hard at it, focused on getting to a leadership job. I was making sure, though, that I got some useful experience and some useful qualifications behind me, so that when I was ready, when the children were a bit older, I could really go for it. And that's what I did. And I think people need to realize, and women, and one of the things we can do at university to help the women that are in our system, and you're right, women are outnumbering men now in terms of higher education participation across the whole region. And I think we need to prepare people at university to be adults and engaged in the workforce, not just people who can pass exams. I don't think anybody, I'm sure Al-Fanar Media doesn't want to employ people who can just pass exams. You want to employ people in front, behind the camera, in whatever post-production. You want to employ good people who are technically good, but who can also communicate, who can work in a team, who can work to deadlines, etc. So, all of these other skills that you have to prepare people for at university. And I think the other responsibility we have is to prepare people for a very long working life. The Gulf region, it has become very wealthy with fossil fuels mainly, but also, and liquid natural gas, but also nowadays lots of other areas of manufacturing and so on. So this is a successful region, and it has excellent access to healthcare. And what that means is almost everybody now who is in the Gulf under the age of 40 will probably have a life expectancy of 100 years. If you're going to live to be 100 years old, then you need to think about having a work lifespan. So you don't need to be always pushing for leadership. And I think we have a responsibility at university to say, look, you young people, your working life, you will be working till 75. So if you're going to be working till 75, do not panic about getting there in a big hurry. Just make sure that you plan your career so that when you are ready as a woman to push for positions of leadership, you have all the right tools in the bag and some relevant experience along the way. It's not essential to be the CEO of a company by the time you're 33 or something. You know, it is perfectly okay to spend a chunk of your career raising a family and doing other things and still working. But it's perfectly all right. You don't have to have that pressure on you. And you're going to be working a very long time. So there's going to be plenty of time. And I think we need to prepare people. We need to prepare people. I commend to you, by the way, the book, The 100-Year Life by Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott. And if you go to the website of that, there's a test you can do on the website, which is free, where you fill it in and it tells you if you're preparing yourself well for a 100-year life.
Yeah, this is very inspiring, and I will sure do this. Talking also about universities and the realities. Again, I want to ask you: are universities sufficiently connected to boardroom realities? How important is international exposure and cross-sector experience? On another way, I can say that, are we successfully linking academic pathways to board level opportunities?
It's interesting, that question, because I've served on public company boards now for 15 years or something. Yeah, long time. And in the UK, I served on various different financial services company boards. I was what they call an approved person by the financial regulator in the UK. So I was allowed to serve on financial services boards. And I wasn't just public companies. I did do public companies, but I also sat on private equity companies. And increasingly, of course, we have a lot of private equity ownership now in the Gulf, and there are a lot of those companies around too. So it's not just family companies that will be having more female representation. It's also private equity owned businesses. And now I serve on a US company board, a Fortune 500 company board. And of course, at the same time, I'm a professor in a university and lead a university. So I have this unique view, which really serves me well, of looking at how a company is run and participating in a governance of a big US company, and at the same time, running a university and teaching people. So I think it is really good for academics to serve on boards. And on my US board, there is actually another academic. So there is a professor from Bocconi University in Italy, and he's a finance professor and a specialist in share buybacks. He publishes on share buybacks and capital structures, and so he's a specialist in this area. Equally, I have seen scientists serve on boards of companies where the company needs the understanding of IP development and technology patents and so on. So I do think academics make very good board members, and I've seen that in practice. So I would encourage more academics to consider board service. And the really big opportunity there is most universities in the region have industrial advisory boards. So what I would say is, pick your industrial advisory boards well, work with them well, and get them to build a good relationship with them. And at some point, you need to actually say to them, if a board role comes up in the company, maybe not on the main PLC board, but maybe one of the subsidiary boards, I would be very interested in serving. Because if people don't know that you'd be interested, they're not clairvoyant. They need to actually know that. And I would encourage academics to build strong relationships with their industrial advisory boards, and then at an appropriate moment to mention to them that they would be interested in serving, maybe on a subsidiary board.
Yeah. One of the most interesting dimensions of the report is variation between GCC countries. The UAE leads at 15%, followed by Bahrain at 10.5%, while Saudi Arabia stands at 2.9%, despite major national transformation efforts. What explains the variation between countries in the region? are there best practices that can be shared across the GCC?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there are very big variances, but although, yes, Bahrain has got 10% and Saudi Arabia has got a rather woeful 2.9, well, it's effectively 3%, 2.9%. Look at the numbers of women. So Bahrain has a very small capital market. We're only talking here about 39 public companies in total in Bahrain. And 10% directors means that there are 36 positions held by women, whereas in Saudi Arabia, there are 58 positions held by women. So in absolute numbers of positions, the rank would look very different. You know, the UAE would still be first, okay, but Saudi Arabia would be second.
Yeah.
And but it's the percentages. It's because Saudi Arabia has such a big capital market.
Yes.
As I said, we're talking about 266 listed companies. So it's because it's got a big capital market, and relative to that size, women have not got the right proportion, in my view, of positions. But best practice is, number one, some kind of target. As I said, the Vision 2030 has a target of 30%. So let's have a target of 30% of women on boards. Yeah, that would be a good target. So let's have some targets in all these countries. Secondly, let's profile some role models. I think it would be good if some of these women, some of these, whatever it is, 403 board positions held by 341 women, I think it would be good for us all to know some of the backgrounds of these 341 women. And this will be a useful thing for a university to do. If anybody would like to do some research into these women, come and find me. I will give you their names. And then maybe you can go and look them up on LinkedIn or whatever. I mean, I think it'd be really good for us to do some more work into who are these 341 women and what are their backgrounds, because they are trailblazers. They are role models. And I think we would like to know more about them. And then the other thing is that I think for the other countries that don't have either legislation or a target, please set a target.
Yes. If you could introduce one structural change tomorrow that would significantly accelerate women's leadership representation across the GCC, what would it be?
It would be a term limit to board directors. So in the UK, you have a number of years you can serve on a board is limited. You are always appointed for 3 years and then you can be renewed for 3 years, and then you can be renewed for another 3 years. After you've served on a board for 9 years, you're no longer considered independent. And the requirement is to either remove that person from the board or to put up a very strong justification in the annual report that you've absolutely got to keep this person on despite them not being independent anymore. Because basically after 9 years, you're considered to be so close to the company and that you're no longer able to see the wood for the trees, that you are not independent. So this is called a term limit. And I would introduce term limits, because if you know that there is a finite length of time that someone's going to serve on the board, that means that there's always turnover. And I think it's at the point where directors change that the opportunity to appoint new people, and therefore women, comes in. So I'd probably introduce term limits.
Before this insightful session, we had a lot of questions that we already mentioned during this incredible interview, and your significant answers and insights, which is very valuable and insightful and inspiring. Professor Heather, thank you very much for this insightful and important discussion. The GCC Board Gender Index Report 2026 reminds us that progress is happening, but also that progress done is not enough if it remains too slow to match the scale of transformation taking place across the region. Today's conversation highlighted that the future of leadership in the Gulf is not only about representation, it is about governance, institutional culture, talent pipelines, education, and ultimately about who shapes the region's future decision-making. At Al-Fanar Media, we believe these conversations are essential because higher education, leadership, and social transformation are deeply interconnected. Thank you to everyone who joined us for this episode of Al-Fanar Media Talks. You can read our coverage of the GCC Board Gender Index Report 2026 on Al-Fanar Media, and continue follow our discussions on higher education governance and the future of the Arab region. And we will also provide a coverage of this special session about the report with Professor Heather. I really thank you a lot for all your insights, and it is always, I said, a privilege to collaborate with you and hear your thought and to know more about your significant work across not only the GCC but across the Arab region. Thank you a lot for being with us today.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, and looking forward for more reports and more insightful reports and studies from your own. Thank you so much, and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.